Gentlemen, ladies, good evening. And I'm Duncan Brown from Johns Hopkins, and welcome to our third Rethinking the Future of Competitions and Conflict seminar. Vice Admiral Morgan cannot be with us tonight, and he sends his apologies. How many of you are here for the first time? Okay. Let me take a second then, and I apologize to those who have been here before and kind of tell you what we're all about and what the seminar series is all about. Basically, it's a seminar series. It's sponsored by the Office of Secretary of Defense's Office of Force Transformation and also by the Navy. The series is run by APL, by Johns Hopkins APL, and if you miss the seminar series, you can go to the website. It's a Johns Hopkins Rethinking website. You can Google that, and you can actually find all the past speakers' notes, speaker presentations, and actually a videotape of everything that we've done so far this year. So if you miss one, it's not the end of the world. You can find that stuff out there. The series central questions that we're trying to ask and that we're trying to cover with various speakers are, what are the future security issues that are facing the U.S. and our allies? What and where are future potential threats? What are the elements of national and coalition power that might be brought to bear in the future? What are the current gaps in national and coalition power? How can the U.S. and our allies get out in front of a lot of problems and prevent problems from occurring? And what constitutes victory? And what do we want as a desired end state in various conflicts or with various competitions? Now, before I introduce tonight's speaker, our next speaker on December 19th will be Ms. Teresa Whalen, and she's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for African Affairs. And she'll be talking about Africa's ungoverned space, which is a new threat paradigm. And again, that's Monday, December 19th. Other potential speakers for next year that we're looking at right now, and again, these are potential, they're not locked in stone yet, are Amory Lovins from the Rocky Mountain Institute to talk about energy and how we might win the oil game in the future. Newt Gingrich, possibly speaking on Iran and how that Iran might be potentially the most dangerous regime on the planet right now. Peter Schwartz, who's written extensively on alternative futures and inevitable surprises, things that are coming down the road that are going to hit us. And Sean O'Brien from the Center of Army Analysis, looking at monitoring and shaping and evaluating various country stabilities. And with that, it now gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, General Corpus. General Corpus is a 1967 graduate of the Philippines Military Academy. In 1970, as a lieutenant, he led a raid on that same academy as a member of the communist-led New People's Army of the Philippines. From 1975 to 76, he was actually a member of the Philippine Communist Party Central Committee. But in 1976, he became disenchanted with the movement and surrendered. And he then spent 10 years as a political prisoner. In 1987, he was granted amnesty by President Corazon Aquino and was reinstated into the Philippine Army as lieutenant colonel. From 1987 to 2000, he held various positions within the armed forces of the Philippines, finally rising in 2001 to 2003 as their chief of intelligence. His other accomplishments include writing a book called The Silent War, which is an insider's look at communist insurgency in the Philippines. He's co-authored the AFP's anti-insurgency campaign program. In 1980, he received a master's in public administration from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. And in 2000, he authored the Philippines National Peace and Development Plan. Please give a warm welcome to General Corpus.
Thank you. My topic this evening is entitled The American Crossroad. I come from the Philippines, a region that is called Southeast Asia. And the main aggregation in that region is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, with 5 original members, as shown, followed by Brunei in 1984, Vietnam in 1995, Laos and Myanmar in 1997, and Cambodia in 1999. With regards to the main threat in the region, there was a perception of China being the major threat way back in the early 50s down to the late 70s because of China's participation in the Korean War, in the Sino-Indian border war in 1962, the Sino-Soviet border war in 1969, the Sino-Vietnam War in 1979, and the border disputes in the Spratleys. But in the last 15 years, China was able to change the general perception in the ASEAN region by projection of its soft power. And this started in 1991 when China first attended the ASEAN Post-Ministerial Conference. This was followed in 1994 by the establishment of the Joint Committee on Economic and Trade Cooperation between China and ASEAN, the Joint Committee on Science and Technology, and also in that year, China became a member of the ASEAN Regional Forum, a forum that discusses military or security matters. In 1996, China became a full dialogue partner of ASEAN. And in 1997, the ASEAN-China Summit became an annual event. In 2002, a framework agreement was forged on ASEAN-China economic cooperation, leading to ASEAN-China free trade agreement within 10 years, or 2012. Also in that year, an agreement was signed on the conduct of parties in the South China Sea, joint development zones in South China Sea, and Southeast Asia was declared a nuclear-free zone, all of which showed the willingness of China to refrain from the use of force as an instrument of policy. Then in 2004, China, India, and Japan signed the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation with ASEAN. And the latest, that will be 2 weeks from now, on December 14 of this year, the first East Asian Summit will be held involving the 10 members of ASEAN, with China, Japan, South Korea, India, Australia, and New Zealand, but with no American leaders or representative invited. So it seems that during the past 15 years or so, China, through the use of diplomacy and soft power, was able to change that perception that China is the main threat in Southeast Asia. And it seems that it has reversed the perception, and now it is the United States that is being isolated in that region of the world. Now, the most significant geopolitical event of the new century is the forging of close military ties between China and Russia. And the factors that led to this undeclared military alliance are the following. The first was the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s. And there was the NATO's eastward advance into the Balkans, into the former members of the Warsaw Pact, Hungary, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and then the invasion of Yugoslavia. And during that invasion of Yugoslavia, the Chinese embassy in Belgrade was bombed. And then there was the entry of the United States into Central Asia, with the establishment of bases in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Iraq, and Kyrgyzstan. Well, the US base in Kyrgyzstan is only approximately about 200 miles from the border of China, and it happens to be also very near Lop Nor, the nuclear testing ground of China. So of course you cannot avoid China feeling threatened by that base in Kyrgyzstan, because it's only a few minutes by fighter jets. There is also the issue of Taiwan. Taiwan was included in the plan for establishing the theater missile defense of the United States, covering Japan, South Korea, and that portion of Northeast Asia. And since China feels that Taiwan is part of China, and China is a province, China felt threatened that the United States will include Taiwan in the theater missile defense program of the United States in that area. There was also the forging of a closer US-Japan military alliance, which was just confirmed a few weeks ago. Also, Russia and China view each other as serving as a strategic rear. There was also the unilateral abrogation of the anti-ballistic missile treaty by the United States way back in 2001. Which brought China and Russia together to oppose that move by the United States, because they felt that it will lead to another arms race. There was also the US arms embargo of China in 1999 during the that Tiananmen Square incident. The Western powers and the United States imposed an arms embargo on China. So China was forced to approach Russia for its modern weapons requirement. And then there was the unilateral action of the United States and the United Kingdom in Iraq. And there was also China's need for Russian oil and modern weapon systems. And in turn, Russia's need for markets and financial assistance from China. And then last year, there was that Operation Summer Pulse in July of 2004, where 7 aircraft carrier battle groups converged in the South China Sea. When China declared that it was unlawful for Taiwan to declare independence, the United States sent or conducted military exercise using 7 aircraft carrier battle groups out of the 12 to converge off the shores of China. By the way, that's the first time that it was ever done in the world. Usually, the United States used 2 or 3 aircraft carrier battle groups. But converging 7 battle groups is very threatening to China. Then the joint desire of both Russia and China to counterbalance superpower dominance and create a multipolar world. And the latest is last August, China and Russia, for the very first time, conducted joint military anti-terrorist exercise. They said anti-terrorist exercise, but they used strategic bombers in that exercise. Other groupings in the Asian region. In 1997, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States tried to organize this grouping in Central Asia, involving Georgia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, and Moldova. Formerly, Uzbekistan was included in this group, but Uzbekistan transferred to another organization called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which was organized in turn by China and Russia, involving 4 other Central Asian countries: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, with Pakistan, Iran, India, and Mongolia now attending those meetings as observers. And the significant thing that they did lately, when they conducted their last summit in July, they called on the United States to set a deadline for withdrawal from Central Asia in their Astana summit. And those are the bases that were established by the United States in Central Asia and the Middle East. One in Uzbekistan, one in Kyrgyzstan, one in 9 in Afghanistan, 4 in Pakistan, and 12 in Iraq, 14 in Iraq. I think there's also a base in Tajikistan, manned by the French, and another base in Uzbekistan manned by the Germans. So the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, in their summit declaration last July, called for the United States to set a deadline on when it will withdraw its forces in Central Asia. In 1998, Dick Cheney, now U.S. Vice President, but then Chief Executive of a major oil service company, remarked, "I cannot think of a time when we have had a region emerge as suddenly to become as strategically significant as the Caspian. But the oil and gas there is worthless unless it is moved. The only route which makes both political and economic sense is through Afghanistan." As you can see, the Caspian is one of the richest region in the world in oil resources. And the only way to bring the oil out is through Afghanistan, passing through Pakistan and out into the Persian Gulf. Another emerging alliance is called the BRICS, composed of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, with Iran and Venezuela as observers. This is a strategic alliance for security, trade, and energy. And some analysts are saying that the BRICS alliance has 75% of the world's population and 80% of the world's natural resources. And according to Goldman Sachs, India's economy will be larger than Japan by 2032. China's economy will be larger than the United States by 2041. And the BRICS economies will be larger than the Group of Six by 2039. These developments, the emergence of the BRICS alliance, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the coming together of Russia and China in a military alliance, I guess is a very significant development for the United States, because it has a potential, they have the potential of being more powerful, much stronger than the former Warsaw Pact under the Soviet Union. The coming together of China and Russia alone will mean that in any future conflict, the United States will be confronted by a much more powerful organization than the Warsaw Pact. Now, among those countries in the BRICS and the SCO, or Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the country worth watching is China. Since 1978, China has averaged 9.4% annual GDP growth. five-fold increase in total output per capita from 1982 to 2002. Last year, its foreign direct investment amounted to about $61 billion. And possibly this year it will be more. Foreign trade amounted to 851 billion US dollars, which is now the third largest in the world. US trade deficit with China is set to soar above 200 billion US dollars for 2005. China is producing 442,000 new engineers a year, with 48,000 graduates with masters and 8,000 PhD annually, compared to only 60,000 new engineers in the United States. For last year, China enjoyed $36 billion trade surplus with the United States in the trade of advanced technology products or items with high R&D content. That means that China is fast advancing in terms of science and technology. $20,000 new manufacturing facilities a year or each year. China combines low-cost, vast manpower reserves with financial and technological strength of rich neighbors like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, even Malaysia. $750 billion in foreign exchange reserves. With at the moment, China holds 252 billion US dollars worth of treasury bonds. You add the holdings of Hong Kong, which is 48 billion, that amounts to about 300 billion US dollars in the hands of China. That is one of the trump cards of China in any conflict with the United States. Because if China abandons the US bonds, US interest rates will shoot up. US housing markets can collapse. And what will happen to the almighty US dollar? Among the 5 basic food, energy, and industrial commodities, grain and meat, oil and coal, and steel, you can add cement. Consumption in China has eclipsed that of the US in all but oil. China has also gone ahead of the United States in consumption of TV sets, refrigerators, and mobile phones. In 1996, China had 7 million cell phones, and the United States had 44 million. Now, less than a decade later, China has more mobile phones users than the US has people. China has about 1 trillion US dollars in personal savings and a saving rate of close to 50%. The US, on the other hand, has about $158 billion in personal savings and a savings rate of about 2%, which is a very big difference. Shanghai boasts 4,000 skyscrapers, double the number in New York City. In Songbai, maybe most of you have not heard about Songbai, in Harbin City, in Heilongjiang Province. Songbai now is in the process of building a city as big as New York City. Kishore Mahbubani thus commented about China: delivering rapid economic growth in small and medium-sized societies is difficult enough. But to watch the world's most populous society experience the world's most rapid growth is like watching the fattest kid in school win the 100 meters hurdles. So, what does the future hold for emerging power China and superpower America? America now, because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, is left as the sole superpower in the world. It has the world's largest economy, world leader in science and technology. Its transnational corporations span the globe, and its military strength has no equal. But the question in people's minds is that how will America use its power as a superpower? Will it use this power to lead the world toward peace and prosperity? Lead in reducing poverty on earth? Lead in the fight for a better environment? Or a Pax Americana obtained and maintained by force? Here are some disturbing policy statements from U.S. leadership that is found to be quite bothersome by some political observers. Included in these documents are the National Security Strategy of the United States of America that came out in September of 2001. President George W. Bush's speech at the graduation ceremony at West Point on June 1, 2002. Rebuilding America's Defenses, Strategy, Forces, and Resources for the New Century. A report of the Project for the New American Century, or PNAC, in September of 2000. And Defense Planning Guidance written by former Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz in February 18, 1992. Here are some excerpts from these documents that is quite bothersome for some political observers. Excerpt from the Defense Planning Guidance by former Deputy Secretary Paul Wolfowitz, who is now the head of the World Bank. Our first objective is to prevent the re-emergence of a new rival, either on the territory of the former Soviet Union or elsewhere, that poses a threat on the order of that posed formerly by the Soviet Union. This is a dominant consideration underlying the new regional defense strategy and requires that we endeavor to prevent any hostile power from dominating a region whose resources would, under consolidated control, be sufficient to generate global power. From the same document, the U.S. must show the leadership necessary to establish and protect a new order that holds the promise of convincing potential competitors that they need not aspire to a greater role or pursue a more aggressive posture to protect their legitimate interests. We must maintain the mechanism for deterring potential competitors from even aspiring to a larger regional or global role. In the Middle East and Southeast Asia, our overall objective is to remain the predominant outside power in the region and preserve U.S. and Western access to the region's oil. Preemption. That should the United States or its allies be threatened by terrorist or rogue states suspected or are engaged in the production of weapons of mass destruction, the United States will launch preemptive strikes or preemptive wars, like in the latest Iraq war. Unilateralism, that the United States reserves the right to pursue unilateral military action when multilateral consensus or solution cannot be agreed upon, again exemplified in the latest Iraq war. No distinction between terrorists and those who harbor them. President Bush announced, every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. Immediate result, the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. For ordinary observers, these new U.S. doctrines spell a non-benevolent world order, a Pax Americana obtained and maintained by force. The framers of the national security strategy of the United States of America hope that such world order will last throughout the new American century. So why do I say that this is highly doubtful? I would like to present to you two worst-case scenarios which will show that this thing will be highly doubtful. So I will give you some worst-case scenarios for the new American century. Why should we, as planners, consider the worst-case scenario? Because of hard lessons from history. The Romans did not consider the worst-case scenario when Hannibal crossed the Alps and attacked them from the rear. The Japanese did not consider the worst case scenario when they were bombed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The French did not consider the worst case scenario in Dien Bien Phu. They thought that it was impossible for the Viet Minh guerrillas to hand carry their artillery piece by piece over the mountains. And they did not consider also the worst case scenario when they built the Maginot Line. The United States did not consider the worst case scenario in Pearl Harbor and in 9/11. And also, during the Iraq invasion, instead of considering the worst case scenario, the United States planned for the best case scenario. Maybe you will remember those statements that the war in Iraq will be a cakewalk, that Iraqis will be dancing in the streets, welcoming incoming U.S. tanks, throwing flowers, that they will be welcomed as liberators. So, here is the worst case scenario for the new century. U.S. launches preventive war against China. Goldman Sachs predicts that by 2041, China will surpass the U.S. economy. This is quite worrisome for the United States because economic power begets military power. So the United States does not want China to catch up and attain parity that can challenge U.S. roles as the sole superpower in the world. China counters by strengthening military ties with Russia and Iran. China enters into free trade agreements with ASEAN, India, Pakistan, New Zealand, and Australia. U.S. adopts protectionist trade policies against China, forbids technology transfers, enforces weapons embargo, control of strategic raw materials by establishment of bases in Central Asia and the Middle East, and forges a strong military alliance with Japan. China, in turn, forms the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the so-called BRIC alliance, composed of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, as a counterweight to superpower dominance. China also seals oil deals with Russia, Kazakhstan, and Iran. By the way, the deal with Iran is considered the deal of the century. It is worth $200 billion US. Signs at least 40 oil agreements with various African countries, and with Venezuela, Brazil, Ecuador, Colombia, Canada, Australia, Uzbekistan, and Sudan. Before China overtakes the United States economy and starts building a strong military of its own, U.S. top planners, led by the Project for the New American Century, decide to launch a preventive war. As a pretext for attacking China, the U.S. instigates Taiwan to declare her independence. After military coordination with Russia and Iran and prepositioning of submarines and missile systems, China launches a missile attack on Taiwan, targeting command and control nodes, military bases, logistics centers, and air defense installations with short-range ballistic missiles, medium-range ballistic missiles, and land attack cruise missiles from land, sea, and air. As the United States mobilizes its aircraft carrier battle groups in response, China draws its first trump card by leaking to the world media that it is unloading its huge holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds and shifting to gold and euro dollars. As China expected, the United States sends 7 aircraft carrier battle groups plus 2 from the United Kingdom into the South China Sea, 3 in the Persian Gulf, and 2 in the Indian Ocean as reserve. The confrontation begins. Japan and South Korea align with the United States. The same goes true with the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, and Canada. Germany and France remain neutral, and so do other members of the NATO alliance. ASEAN and India also remain neutral, while Russia, North Korea, Iran, Libya, and the members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Central Asia join the side of. At this time, the United States anti-ballistic missile system is not yet in place, making U.S. cities vulnerable to Chinese and Russian ICBMs, or intercontinental ballistic missiles. While Chinese major cities are laced with tunnels for nuclear defense. So the United States forgoes the option for a nuclear first strike. Aircraft carrier battle groups remain the main instrument for U.S. power projection. But supersonic, highly accurate cruise missiles, as shown, and short and medium-range ballistic missiles in China's inventory now render carrier battle groups highly vulnerable. The U.S. Navy has no known defense against supersonic, sea-skimming, highly accurate, pop-up, and maneuvering fire-and-forget cruise missiles, traveling at more than twice the speed of sound, or faster than a rifle bullet, such as Granite, Moskits, Yacon type of cruise missiles now in China's inventory. Here are samples of those missiles. The Mosquit. The first one is the Granite. The Yacon. These supersonic cruise missiles can be delivered by Su-27s, Su-30s, H-7s, JH-7As, Tu-22Ms or backfires, surface ships, diesel submarines, or common trucks with ranges of 250 to 500 kilometers from standoff position. The defense of the U.S. Navy, which is basically the Aegis ship defense system, is no defense against sea-skimming supersonic cruise missiles, because the Aegis is designed to intercept exo-atmospheric missiles, or missiles that travel above the atmosphere or in outer space. But the Aegis cannot defend against supersonic cruise missiles traveling a few feet above the water. And the U.S. Navy's Phalanx close-in weapon system is also no defense against the supersonic cruise missiles. In addition, the U.S. Navy has no known defense against the Squall rocket torpedoes that travel at 200 knots with range of up to 7,500 yards. Here are some samples of the Squall rocket torpedoes. Only Russia and China have this kind of torpedoes, perhaps including North Korea and Iran. The only country now that perhaps can counter the Squall is Germany with its Barracudas. But the United States up to now has no defense against these rocket torpedoes. China plans its own worst-case scenario. China, having observed Operation Summer Pulse in 2004, where 7 aircraft carrier battle groups converged off China's coast, had planned its own worst-case scenario. 12 U.S. aircraft carrier battle groups plus 3 from the United Kingdom. The China counter strategy is secretly planned with Russia and Iran. Quoting from Mao Zedong, Mao Zedong, when the enemy advances, we retreat. So China's surface ships conduct a strategic retreat as 7 U.S. and 2 British aircraft carrier battle groups advance into the South China Sea. Russian and Chinese submarines, meanwhile, lie motionless and silent on both forward wings of the expected theater of operation in the South China Sea and beyond. Here is the map of the area. Defense planners at NORAD are jubilant as they watch on the giant screen monitors the hasty retreat of Chinese surface vessels as 9 aircraft carrier battle groups make their approach into the South China Sea. But computer monitors suddenly go blank. C4ISR via satellites ground to a halt. China has drawn the second of its hidden trump cards by activating its anti-satellite parasite satellites, or nanosatellites, or microsatellites, anti-satellite space mines, and ground-based anti-satellite laser weapons. In tandem with Chinese and Russian hackers launching pre-planned attack on C4ISR of the United States and the United Kingdom. A saturation barrage of hundreds of supersonic cruise missiles fired from land, aircraft, and surface ships, as well as short and medium-range ballistic missiles, all armed with a variety of conventional warheads, anti-radar, radio frequency weapons, and fuel-air explosives, head for their designated targets. The third trump card is drawn and laid on the table, designed to win victory with one strike, which is one of the doctrines of the Chinese armed forces. Meanwhile, more than 100 prepositioned and forward-deployed Chinese and Russian submarines, lying silent and motionless on both wings of the theater, begin to maneuver to the rear of the battle groups to complete the encirclement. With a couple of submarines firing Squall rocket torpedoes and supersonic submarine-launched anti-ship cruise missiles, as US and UK aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines come within range. Within minutes, the 7 US and 2 British aircraft carrier battle groups are devastated, turning the China Sea encounter into a modern-day Battle of Cannae. U.S. forces in being and logistics in place in Japan, South Korea, Guam, Kyrgyzstan, Okinawa, and Diego Garcia are hit by missiles armed with fuel-air explosives and radio frequency warheads, simultaneous with a missile attack on the carriers. One of China's doctrine is active defense. It will not allow a potential foe to mass forces and passively await invasion of their homeland. China will strike while the adversary is still assembling or preparing to attack, to gain initiative by striking first. This is one of the doctrines of the Chinese armed forces. In the Middle East, China's preemptive attack is immediately followed by an Iranian land-based cruise missile attack, again using supersonic cruise missiles that are positioned in mountain caves along the shorelines of the Persian Gulf, against the 3 U.S. carrier battle groups in the Persian Gulf. Iran also cuts off U.S. oil supply at the Strait of Hormuz by hitting a tanker while crossing the bottleneck and enforcing blockade with mobile land-based cruise missiles hidden in caves along the long Iranian coastline fronting the Persian Gulf. As you can see from the map, Iran is one of the most mountainous countries in the world. And they can position their cruise missiles along the long coastlines fronting the Persian Gulf. And if 3 aircraft carrier battle groups will enter the Persian Gulf, it will probably result in a massacre. Because the United States Navy right now has no defense against Yak Hunt, Mosquitoes, and Granite-type cruise missiles that are supersonic and stealthy, that can be positioned along the rugged mountainous coastline along the Persian Gulf in the border of Iraq, in the territory of Iran. A weak nation like China or Iran, without a single aircraft carrier, can obliterate the aircraft carrier battle groups of a superpower. A classic illustration of the power of asymmetric warfare. Again, this is one of the doctrines of the People's Liberation Army: victory through inferiority over superiority. In short, asymmetric warfare. To summarize the trump cards of China, how China will fight a superpower like the United States and hope to win, are the following. They call it selected pockets of excellence for asymmetric warfare. These trump cards are as follows. To repeat, the huge holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds, anti-satellite weapons like nanosatellites, microsatellites, space mines, laser weapons against satellites, supersonic cruise missiles like the Mosquitoes, Yak Hunts, and Granites, rocket torpedoes like the Squall, mobile ICBMs such as DF-31s, and submarine fleet armed with nuclear-tipped long-range land attack cruise missiles that will put coastal cities of the United States at great risk. And of course, the new RMA that are under development in China, such as lasers. They are now very advanced in lasers, microwave weapons, electromagnetic pulse weapons, etc. Asymmetric warfare was likened to a Chinese boxer with a keen knowledge of vital body points, who can bring an opponent to his knees with a minimum of movements, referring to the trump cards that I mentioned earlier. In Central Asia, Russia launches a simultaneous surprise offensive with land attack cruise missiles on U.S. military bases in Central Asia, followed by ground assault, acting in concert with other members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In a matter of hours from the start of general hostilities, America is badly crippled in 3 major regions of the world: in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, and in Central Asia. So, the core mission of the U.S. Armed Forces to fight and win multiple simultaneous major theater wars, thus can literally go up in smoke in the first few hours of the asymmetric battlefield. And if the United States will decide to go to war in the Asian mainland, it will have an inherent disadvantage, because there is a vital geopolitical reality that the US will be operating on exterior lines, while China or Russia will operate on interior lines. This will give China a distinct advantage in a major regional war in Asia. Vulnerable US sea lanes of communication. The United States will be forced to cross the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean in going to war in the Asian mainland. And along those routes, Chinese and Russian submarines will be lurking in ambush, making troop replenishment and resupply too expensive and dangerous. Compare this US handicap with troop movements by Chinese troops using railways and highways inside the China mainland, enjoying the advantage of shorter and less vulnerable lines of communication. Chinese troops can concentrate numerically superior forces rapidly at any given point to defeat the invading US forces one by one. And if the United States forces are lucky enough to land on the Chinese mainland, they will be faced not only with a conventional People's Liberation Army of more than 2 million strong, but with a people's militia in their teeming millions for a modern-day people's war. The foreign invaders will be likened to a lion invading a pool full of piranhas, or a king cobra encroaching into a hill full of fire ants. So, can America launch a preventive war against China and expect to win? If the US cannot win a major land war against China, can it then impose its will against much smaller and weaker adversaries, like, say, Iran, or Venezuela, or North Korea? Let us now look at the next scenario, which is asymmetric war. US attacks medium power X. Asymmetric warfare is a form of warfare that is employed by the weak to defeat the strong. No major power can match a superpower weapon for weapon or systems for systems. The weak fight and win by avoiding the enemy's strength, attacking enemy's weaknesses. Example is David and Goliath. History is replete with vivid examples where a much stronger and larger force was defeated by a weaker and smaller force. The first is Hannibal in the Battle of Cannae. The French were defeated by the Viet Minh guerrillas in Dien Bien Phu. The Soviet forces were defeated in Afghanistan. The Soviet forces were a superpower at the time. And another superpower, the United States, was defeated by ill-clad, ill-fed, and ill-armed Viet Cong guerrillas. The US forces may possess the most sophisticated weapon system, but the adversary in an unconventional warfare situation is invisible. and advanced weapons are negated if you cannot see your enemy. In asymmetric warfare, fighting is conducted at the team level. Thousands of agile and invisible teams composed of 2 to 5 man members, equipped with man-portable surface-to-air missiles, portable anti-tank guided weapons, mortars, 50 caliber sniper rifles, anti-tank mines, anti-personnel mines, sea mines, and C4 explosives for improvised explosive devices like road bombs or suicide bombers. These invisible teams merge with the populace and come out only when there is a vulnerable target. Strike, then evaporate. They communicate via runners with coded messages, so there are no electronic signals to track down. They operate semi-autonomously, so there are no centers of gravity that can be targeted. And since they are one with the people, their human intelligence is far more superior than the hated foreign invaders. They also enjoy great advantage in psychological operations, for it is much easier for locals to steer nationalist sentiments against a foreign occupier than for an aggressor to justify occupation. Another weapon of the weak is asynchronous warfare, where the weak bides its time to strike back, and it strikes at a time and place when and where the adversary least expects. Example is in Iraq. The resistance may recruit Iraqi scientists and infiltrate America and manufacture dirty bombs, chemical and biological weapons. Such weapons may be detonated near the U.S. Congress during the U.S. President's State of the Union address. They can hire a private plane and use it to spread biological and chemical agents over New York City or Washington, D.C. Or mail letters containing anthrax to key offices of vital services all over the United States and paralyze utilities and government functions nationwide. Iraqi resistance or their allies can smuggle components of portable surface-to-air missiles, assemble them in the United States, and employ them simultaneously in major airports in America. Or they can employ those portable surface-to-air missiles to simultaneously target American airlines taking off or landing in different airports around the globe. Some major powers may pass on some of their research on the revolution of military affairs to Iraqi resistance for field testing. These weapons include laser weapons, ultra-high frequency weapons, high-powered microwave weapons, radio frequency, and electromagnetic guns, to include miniature robot ants that infiltrate computers, stay dormant, then activate on signal to destroy their host. Iraqis can also recruit their best hackers and hack the U.S. banking system, stock exchange, airport and train control systems, power and water supply systems, ballistic missile system, and other systems critical to the U.S. economy. The U.S. may be the most advanced in information technology. Now, it is too dependent on computers and high-tech equipment that its inherent strength has, ironically, become its Achilles heel. Here, we are talking only of Iraq. What if the U.S. tries to impose its will and dominance on 5 or 10 other sovereign nations? Can the United States hope to fight and win an asymmetric war against smaller nations fighting against hegemony? Can America afford or survive 10 Iraqs or 10 Vietnams? Or can America win versus an invisible army just in Iraq alone? To conclude, the United States now stands at a crossroad. One road leads to world domination. Using military might, it can strike at any perceived threat, change sovereign regimes at will, grab precious mineral resources, and control local economies with its transnational corporations. But the road to world domination is full of risks, and what is planned on paper may not turn out as dreamed of. Pursuing this path can ignite the outrage and hatred of people all over the world. The other road leads to world leadership. The United States can choose to use its power, wealth, and influence to sincerely do good for the people of this planet. It can lead in easing or obliterating the debt burden of developing nations. It can focus on the fight against poverty, or the fight against drugs, or the effort to save the deteriorating environment of planet Earth. By gaining the world's sympathy and support, terrorism directed against Americans and the U.S. mainland will be greatly minimized, if not totally eliminated. The alternate road, in fact, is the key to defeating the phenomenon of terrorism gripping the world today. If the U.S. chooses the latter, I am confident that America will gain the hearts and minds of all of humankind. Then it can be a true world leader. Only then can it maintain its preeminent world status. I have given you a glimpse of what lies beyond those mountains. Some roads will lead the United States into a precipice. I gave you the worst case scenario so that you can do something to prevent those worst case scenarios from happening. Thank you very much.
I know in your paper you mentioned the critical effort of trying to bridge the gap between maybe the elites and the poor to foster sustained economic growth that will make the Philippines a strong power. They have a race now between the population growth rate and the economic growth rates. And the last two presidential elections have where the close contenders have been movie stars who represent some Charles Bronson type characters and stuff. I wonder, from your experience, what are the key programs in the Philippines that will get the country growing on a sustained manner to solve this problem?
Maybe I can relate to you my experience because I joined the rebels when I was a young lieutenant. One of the basic reasons why I joined the rebels is because of the desire to change the status quo in the Philippines. And this status quo is a social structure where only a few, an elite few, controls both economic power and political power. Because economic power in the Philippines begets political power. So you don't really have a democracy, but a plutocracy, a government of the few, by the few, and for the few. And that condition, whereby there is a big gap between the rich and the poor, is the real cause of rebellion in many countries, not only in the Philippines. Because it is an unjust system. And because capital begets more capital, the rich few become even more richer, while the poor becomes even more poorer, because their income is eaten up by inflation, by devaluation, by rising prices, rising unemployment, underemployment. So there is that tendency for the rich to become even richer, while the poor will become even poorer. So the gap between the rich and the poor will widen even further. And that is being exacerbated now because of the advent of information technology. Because there is also that digital divide, where only a few rich people in the city can access the information highway, while 80 to 90% of the population in the rural areas are cut off from the information economy. So there is that, again, that digital divide. Now, if you will ask me what my solution will be, the first one that I can think of is to use the advances in information technology. For instance, broadband satellite communication system. If that system is set up in every barangay or in every village in the Philippines, we will be able not only to wire the villages, not only to connect the villages into the information highway to bridge the digital divide, but that system can bring the best teachers from our best schools down to the masses, down to the village level. And it is only by attacking the problem of poverty, by empowering the poor economically, by giving him access to quality education through this system of broadband satellite communication system, that we can address poverty in a big way. Because the usual approach to attacking poverty is dole-outs or charity. The poor do not need charity. They want social justice. And we can give social justice to the poor if rich nations like the United States will help the Philippines establish a broadband satellite communication system that will link all the villages to the information highway and use that highway to bring accessible quality education to the people. Because there is a saying that it is better to teach a poor man how to fish than giving him fish. Now, do you know that the best legacy that Filipinos remember about American colonialism when you colonized the Philippines is that you brought modern education to our country through the Thomasites. If you want to help the Philippines again and attack the root cause of insurgency, the United States should help countries like the Philippines address the problem of insurgency or rebellion or terrorism by establishing the hardware, by putting up the hardware in the remote villages, the hardware for connecting the villages to high-speed internet connection through through satellite, broadband satellite communication system. You see, when I was in the service, we had this program, and your president, President Bush, promised to give aid of $33 million for education in Mindanao. And we were already planning on putting up a system like that. But when we unfortunately withdrew our forces from Iraq, your government also withdrew your help of that 33 million. So nothing happened. This is what I can say about terrorism. You are all concerned about terrorism. You cannot defeat terrorism by force, by military means. Because terrorism is like the Hydra or amoeba. You kill one, 5 or 10 will take their place. So how can you win in Iraq? By killing the insurgents, the rebels? If you kill one insurgent, 10 or even 20 or even 100 will take their place. Insurgency or rebellion or terrorism is like weeds growing in your cropland. If you want to get rid of the weeds or grass or kugon grass, it is not enough to cut down the grass or even burn it. Because with the first drop of rain, the grass will grow again. That is the nature of insurgency. That is the nature of terrorism. That is the nature of rebellion. If you want to address the problem of rebellion or insurgency or terrorism, you attack the root causes. And one of the root causes is what I told you, the gap that keeps widening between the rich and the poor, which brings about an unjust social system. That is the reason why people are rebelling. And that can be addressed in a big way, in a meaningful way, if you bring quality education to the masses by putting up the infrastructure whereby we can bring our best teachers from our best schools down to the rural areas, down to the remote villages, and connect those remote villages to the rest of the world through the internet. That's my answer.
Actually, I have two questions. The first is, one could be led to believe by your brief that perhaps the U.S. should disengage from many areas around the world. And there are some in the U.S. who would say that when we disengage, for example, from a lot of different places, it actually led to war. It actually led to aggression by others. It allowed them to become aggressors. So that's the first question. The second question is, you talk about bringing education to various parts of the world. One would say that before you can bring education and before you can create an infrastructure that allows for education to take place, you have to somehow quell the insurgency or destroy the insurgency. So how do those two really go together? I mean, it seems like you have to do both. You can't just do one without the other.
Yeah, okay. With regards to the first question, I believe that the United States as a superpower should get involved all over the world. But the involvement, the nature of involvement must be towards the exercise of soft power. Not the exercise of brute force to force your will on other nations to change their system. as I said, the United States can get involved, can be the world leader in attacking the problem of poverty all over the world, in attacking the problem of deadly diseases, the problem of drugs, the problem of mounting foreign debt of poor nations. You can lead in establishing distance learning or bringing quality education to the poor of this planet. Not going to a place to control the oil resources or natural resources. Not going to a place to enforce your will. And changing the culture of other countries or systems of other countries. Other countries have a right to diversity, and you cannot force other people to adopt your system. So that's number one. Now, with regards to the second one, the bringing quality education to the masses will attack the root cause of insurgency. Of course, you must do it side by side, okay? You have a right-hand effort and a left-hand effort. You use the right-hand effort to defeat the insurgents militarily. But I believe that the left-hand effort is more important, because it is the left-hand effort that will attack the root causes of insurgency, that will dig out the roots of insurgency. As I said, insurgency is like weeds growing in your cropland. To get rid of the weeds, you cannot get rid of it by just cutting the weeds or burning them, because with the first drop of rain, the grass will grow again. So, the best left-hand effort, I believe, is education, quality education to the people. And it is only by giving access to quality education to the poor that you can empower them to address the problem of poverty in a big way.